Alrighty, so this is part 5 for this BMW. You'd have to watch the first parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 to kind of see what's going on with it. But long story short, this Valvetronic motor here was shorted internally. There's 5 Hall effect sensors. Each have 5-volt references, and then there's basically 3 phases of 12 volts going to it. The Hall effect sensors, one of them was shorted and took the 5-volt reference down, which shared the accelerator pedal position. Couldn't drive the car because of that. Now, then after that, there's 3 12-volt wires that go to it. I was getting 12, and supposed to get 12, but I was getting 12, and like 3.2 or 3.3 volts. And it had an internal fault in the DME. Whether that Valvetronic took that out. So we, instead of a new DME, which is $2,000 from the dealer plus programming, you got to pull it up under the intake manifold. I went to a junkyard salvage yard and I got a used one, but you have to pull the manifold to get to it, kind of a pain. I used an Autel well, not just an Autel, I used some other stuff between that and some other cloning software I have to basically clone the double EEPROM, try to get the INT flash in. Basically, long story short, I cloned it, cloned the ISN, the VIN, the mileage, the newest software, and that internal malfunction for the DME is now gone. There's no issues with that. In the 12 volts is back, and it doesn't have the 5-volt reference going down like it did at first. Everything's been going good, except we got a couple other issues. I've been driving it, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 miles today, and with everything good to go, it's been running fine. And then once in a while, I get these 2 codes, which we never had in any of these videos. The Valvetronic adjustment range fault range check. So every time you turn the key on and start it, it seems like it does a check from end stop point to stop point. And the Valvetronic output stage overload. Let me give you the definition of those before I clear the code. So, per BMW service information, the adjustment range check is if it's basically out of range more than 2 degrees. So you got to go through that. There is a, is it wear at the travel stops? Is it wear in the Valvetronic mechanism? Because it has an intake cam, exhaust cam, but the eccentric shaft position is what this is all talking about. The actual eccentric shaft itself. Is that thing binding up? Or what? That's that code, the fault range, and then the Valvetronic Valvetronic overload protection output stage overload. The diagnostic function monitors the temperature of the driver circuit, which is inside the DME. If it's over 120 degrees Celsius, if the Valvetronic consumes excessive energy owing to, stiction high resistance in the system, blipping the accelerator, freaking open loop operation, limp hold mode, learning routines, and so forth. So basically, and make sure nothing's sticking. So what we need to look at now is if one of 2 things. Well, we got everything programmed, updated, adaptions cleared, and everything. We got to do the Valvetronic learns, and I've tried it with the Autel, had some issues with it. I'm going to use it with ISTA, the BMW software. That learns everything, because we couldn't learn with the bad motor, which we fixed. We couldn't learn with the bad DME because we wouldn't get the right voltage to it. If everything learns with that and it's good, we're good to go. If it keeps having these issues for these full range stops, then that means we have an issue mechanically binding. And maybe what's going on is, or what happened looking at the full picture, is this thing mechanically binded, shorted out something in that Valvetronic sensor inside of this, obviously, because we proved that in the video series. And then it took out the driver inside the DME. And that code there is picking up that overload protection. So I don't want to hurt anything else. So what we're going to do first is use ISTA. If that learns, cool. If everything's good to go and it never comes back, awesome. If it doesn't, we got to look at that eccentric shaft that's actually mechanically binding, because it doesn't always do it. All right, I'm using ISTA again to look at this like I talked about. So I cleared the codes. Yeah, so they're cleared. Now it says no. It was said yes earlier. But Sometimes it'll be good, and then sometimes it won't be good. Like I said, it'll do a self-test every time you start the car. Must be do a motion sweep from end stop to end stop. And then 1 out of 5 times it'll fail. Like I said, I want to do the relearn with the ISTA. Make sure, was it that, or was there a mechanical binding? And hopefully that's not the case, but that's what I'm wondering. But before I do that, I clicked on software update. And look, our software update is the F10 22.11.510, because I went ahead and updated it to the newest software using the Autel. So that's good there. We'll let this finish timing out, and we'll go back and do our calibration. All right, so I went to service plan, service functions, engine electronics, and see where we're at here. Adjustment programs. There's learn and Valvetronic limit positions and Valvetronic run in phase. That's the one we'd want to do. I'm not saying it's going to work still. Obviously, if there's a binding issue in the eccentric shaft, we'll have to see. The following test module is necessary if Valvetronic servo motor eccentric shaft was changed. Teaching ears are present. Adjustment problems are present. Control, yes. We have all that. Stop engine, switch terminal, key on, engine off. Okay. We did this with the Autel too, but I wanted to use the OE software just to make sure that we are doing it correctly to eliminate all variables. He's thinking right now. So switch it off. I'll wait till the dash goes black. Switch off terminal 15 in R and terminal R. Wait until make sure the light switch is, the light in the start stop button is not on, and then we're going to switch terminal 15 on. So make sure all this is off here. So the dash is off, but the switch is still lit up, so we got to wait for a little bit longer. All right, so that's off. Now we're going to hit this, and then we're going to hit next.
What do you guys want for lunch?
Says the stops are taught in the next step. So we'll continue. All right, so no fault codes are saved for the tested function or component group. So continue service function. Hit next. There's a Valvetronic fault, which is preventive procedure of the break-in phase. First, eliminate the fault, then perform the service function again. To do this, continue with the test plan. So it's not going to let us learn it. It knows there's a fault. We'll run through that plan here in a minute, the action plan to troubleshoot it, but I'm going to look at learn Valvetronic limit positions. And see what this shows. Each time after repair work has been carried on the Valvetronic system, the stops of the adjustment mechanism must be relearned for minimum and maximum lift. During the adaptation process, the eccentric shaft is switched slowly in the direction of minimum lift until a point of mechanical resistance is reached. The position of this mechanical stop is stored the same procedures to the maximum stop. Let's do this. The starting conditions for teaching in stops are not met. Either the engine speed is not exactly 0, which it is, or the Valvetronic relay has not applied. Remedy: briefly start and stop the engine, wait 10 seconds, and continue with repeat test modules. You start and stop it. So I started for a few seconds, turn it off, and then put key on engine off. Waited 10 seconds. It definitely knows there's a fault. I don't even know if it's going to let us go farther. Same screen. Yeah, it doesn't like something So let's go back and do all the fault. Let's read all the fault codes again and go from there. This says there's no for those two Valvetronic faults. I'm going to delete the fault code memory and reread it and make sure it's good to go. Turn ignition off. I'll just skip this part for now. I'll just walk you through how to clear the codes. So we're deleting fault codes, which is nice about using ISTA again. We use it in the other videos where we showed in the Autel. But I believe we use ISTA more, which is the factory software, like I said. We don't have the APP, accelerated pedal position, the fuel pump stuff, low pressure side, all those faults from the bad Valvetronic motor that was shorting it out. And we also don't have internal DME issues. Because like I said, we cloned this DME. We got to use one and cloned it with some special software and did all that stuff. So I'm going to display fault memory. So everything's gone. We don't care about this sliding roof stuff. But their full range check. Delete it again. It says no, it's not present, but once we can do these relearns, like I said, if the relearn's good, and we're done. If it's not, we got a binding shaft. But we fixed the, like I said, we had a lot more codes before where we had issues with Valvetronic shorting the 5-volt reference down, the DME, not getting the 12 volts out. We fixed all that stuff. We just don't know if there's another issue that we're trying to resolve. Or was that an issue that's causing everything? So I deleted them again. Let's take a look. Still shows no for that one. That's present. Let's just run the test plan and just see. I mean, it's not current, but I don't think it's going to learn the stuff. Start up a Valvetronic. The following test module is necessary if the Valvetronic servo motor was changed, which we did. Teaching errors are present. Yes, we know all that. Same stuff we got. Can engine off, we got. Turn this thing off. Shut the door. Gotta wait till that time's out. This is just like we did before. Alright, dash is off. That's still lit up. That should black out here in a minute. Then we'll hit it back on and go from there. Alright, just blacked out. Hit next. We're taught on the next step. Hit next. This is startup Valvetronic. Which makes sense. Every time it starts it does a check. It's supposed to be teaching it in. I just don't know if it's going to fail. If it does, we have an issue with the shaft. The eccentric shaft maybe being binding up. But when I replaced it, it didn't feel binded at all to me. Now we could make sure put an amp clamp on those 3 different wires, phases one at a time, and see how much amperage we're getting, and go from there. Depending on the results we get from these tests and relearns. I made a forward run engine at idle speed. So I started it, hit next, it's at idle speed. The Valvetronic is now broken in. 450 cycles long, run engine idle speed. Somebody completed. That's pretty cool. So it's doing those cycles. And the engine is surging, you can hear it. There's how many cycles it's doing, and it's got to go to 450. I guess the Autel was kind of doing like this, but it didn't count that as good. Hopefully this works and it doesn't get an over amps code for the driver in the DME. Surge in there because it's doing the cycles. We'll let that do that and finish. Alright, so it's at 328. It's got to go to 450s or 450. I guess what it's doing, the Valvetronic is now broken in. Procedure is 450 cycles. The engine is at idle. Number of cycles currently completed is that. And it's surging the engine. I just hope this passes everything and there's not an actual binding issue. Maybe those other codes were coming up because earlier in this video because of we had to use this ISTA to actually break it in after we, fixed everything correctly, which we did. I'll pause it till it's done. This will be the real test, though, if this passes it. If it does, cool. If it doesn't, then we got a shaft issue, eccentric shaft issue. Well, we're getting there. So I was looking at the auto and a different video I was making in regards to this as well, but I didn't have a counter on the auto, and so I didn't know if it was actually doing anything. I don't think it had a counter anyways, that I remember. But it's always best to use the OE software, obviously, which we are. Because when you're done with this repair, everything we did, this is what we need to do. Three left, two left, and one. The Valvetronic is now broken in further. The process may take 50 trouble-free cycles, at least 2 minutes, maximum 10 minutes. Okay. It's that motor, that servo motor in there, must be actuating, turning that worm gear back and forth to actuate that. It's got to have 50 trouble free, which means I guess you would not want any binding or any of that stuff. $42. Stop engine intake successfully complete. Okay, key on engine off. Service function finished. So we should ideally be good to go. Let's read the fault codes. Let's delete these. Alright, so it's deleting them. See what comes back. We'll run it. So we did the braking procedure, the Valvetronic running. So that is, and it passed that time. So ideally it should know its end limits. And then we'll make sure we'll run it and drive it around. I'll drive around through the day, make sure everything is good to go and nothing comes back. The car's got low miles, only 79,000 miles. Okay, no codes, just the sunroof ones we don't care about. Alright, so I started it. Now hopefully everything is learned, which it says it was, but hopefully nothing binds up inside the Valvetronic system and we're good to go. The real test is to drive it and scan it back and forth. So I've been running it. I took it probably another 10-mile drive ever since I did the relearn with ISTA. Started, stopped it probably like 7-8 times. Nothing came back, so it is all good to go. There's no actual binding to the eccentric shaft that needed to be learned. The braking procedure relearned because we changed all those parts, the Valvetronic and the DME. I tried using the auto, but I don't know, was having issues, so I use ISTA, and it's all good now, the factory software. So indeed, the recap on all these video series, I guess it'd be the 5th video, I guess. The Valvetronic motor was obviously shorted, taking out the APP pedal, the low pressure fuel pump because they shared that 5-volt circuit. We fixed that. It was labor intensive to get to that part. And then the DME had an internal fault. Should be 3 phases of 12 volts coming out, 12, 12, and 12. We got 12, 12, and like 3 point something. A new DME was, over $2 grand. Well, $2 grand for the part plus labor programming. I got to use them from a salvage yard. Same one, cloned it, wrote the ISN in, cloned the double EEPROM, Put the newest flash software in there, the INT flash with the autel, and I verified it with ISTA. Did all the relearns and everything's good to go. The only thing in here is the sunroof codes, which, like we said, that's a separate issue. And that's why that little triangle's on right there. Scan it one more time. And this thing runs awesome. It's a cool little car. So, well, it's not a little car, it's a 5 Series, but say it's a fun little car. Yeah, so we are good to go. That is it for this 2011 BMW